Every good close combat unit will tell you that its best friend is line of sight blocking terrain. Today, we're going to tell you how we made our concrete fencing for our urban table.
Anvil of War! Tackling terrain!
Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Tackling Terrain. It's been a little while. Just going to do a quick shameless plug and say if you guys are enjoying our content, please click the subscribe button below. It's also our icon located in the bottom corner of the screen. If you click that, lets us know that you're enjoying what we're doing, and we'll keep making more videos because really we're doing this for you guys. So today we're talking about these things, the fencing that I created for our urban table. We wanted to do a little bit of an Urban Conquest style table. If you guys want to know how we made these, we're going to go through this in a few steps. So first we're going to talk about the materials that we used. We're going to go to the workshop and show you guys exactly how we formed this sort of shape and how we got it to look the way we did. From step one, putting the materials together, to the final step of painting and adding the little details on it. So just one thing I really want to mention, these are extremely cheap for you to make yourself. All of the fencing itself was created using foam core from the dollar store. Really cheap material. I mean, you can get a whole sheet of this stuff. I think I ended up using 2 sheets just to get the sizes right. I screwed up a few pieces also, but I mean, when it's that cheap, you don't really care. And then all of the texturing and everything is just cork board. So again, cork you can buy at the dollar store. So just really cheap materials. The most expensive thing on this whole table is going to be the details that I added after the fact, which includes this spiraled razor wire, which was Army Painter razor wire. Great little buy, and I actually managed to do 8 pieces of these and still have some left over at the end of it. So let's get into it. Let's go to the workshop and we'll talk about the materials you're going to need to complete this project. All right, so when we're approaching this project, this is the outcome that we want to, the desired effect, we'll say. We're going to need some supplies and some tools. So we're going to quickly go over those and then we'll get into making one of these bad boys. So for tools, we're going to need several things. You're going to need a pen. This is going to help you mark your measurements on your materials. A knife, a hobby knife. I also have an X-Acto blade. Good idea to have a brand new blade on these when you are doing your cutting, just because you're going to get a straighter cut. A reminder to be careful when you are using such tools, because corn might be okay with you cutting yourself, but the Anvil of War team is not, so please cut responsibly. You're going to need some brushes. So for these, you're just going to be using these for, obviously for painting. I mean, I did most of the painting on these things with an airbrush, but you can use this for dry brushing. You're also going to need a brush, which is this one right here. It's going to be used to apply the PVA glue or your adhesive to the wall sections to apply your basing materials. Speaking of PVA, Mod Podge. So this stuff was recommended to me by Nick from Plastic Crack Miniatures. I'm going to highly recommend it as well. Thank you, Nick. This stuff has saved me a lot of work. It is a sealer and glue in one. It reduced the amount of coats that I've had to put on over top of my texturing and basing when I've put it on my models and when I put it on my terrain. So I really want to thank him for recommending this stuff. Again, I will recommend watering this down, but we'll talk about that in a bit. You're going to need a hot glue gun. So any hot glue gun will do. With a hot glue gun, you're going to need hot glue. So make sure you have those both. For materials, you're going to need the following. You're going to need some foam core. So this foam core is purchased at the dollar store. It's pretty cheap. You can get it at a lot of hobby stores as well. It's really cheap at the dollar stores, or like any bargain stores, you can usually find a craft section, and in that section you'll find this stuff. Now, this might look a little weird because it's got all this texturing and everything going on. What happened was I actually coated this with some water using a sponge, and then I peeled off the layers of paper off of the top of it. The reason I did that is that I find A, it's easier to cut, B, it gives me a straighter edge when I do cut it because you don't have the sort of flashing from the imperfections from the cut from the paper. And then on top of that, yeah, it's just nicer when you do some battle damage. If you're doing like maybe you're doing some bolter rounds that hit the concrete, and you just kind of want that effect. So it's a good idea to do that. It will warp a little bit if you do put some water on it. So just a recommendation to just lay it flat. You can actually wet the reverse side, and then you can lay it flat, throw some books on top of it, and it'll flatten out perfectly. And then, yeah, you've got a great material here. So here we have some PVC board. So this stuff is pretty solid. It's very, very, very dense. And when you cut it, it's a little more difficult to cut than, say, using like an MDF or something where you can cut it with the with like a jigsaw or a table saw or something like that. This stuff, you are going to get pretty straight lines. Right here is a horrible example because I just broke the crap out of it, but this is a spare piece I had lying around, and it's going to do well to create a base for our terrain piece. So you can see here, we have just a base for the terrain piece. And this stuff is really good in the sense that it retains its shape. It ends up staying really flat, and it doesn't warp over time like MDF does, I find. So it requires less maintenance after the fact. And yeah, and you want your terrain to sit as flat as possible on the table, especially if you're using like a battle mat or something like that. You're also going to need some basing material. So here we have a bunch of ground cork that I used our trusty nut grinder. If you haven't seen that video, we'll link it. It's at the end of this one, but worth taking a look at. It's a nice little investment. It's a tool that will give you endless amounts of basing material, and you can get some really fine basing material like this. I mean, it's more fine than any hobby sand that I have found thus far, but what we're going to end up using this stuff for is the texturing on the walls. So you can see here how it starts to clump together a little bit as you soak it and as you're doing the sealing over it. But that's cool because it gives this really cool concrete texture. And it's okay to have some places that are a little smoother with the exposed foam core, because when you paint that, it's going to look really cool too. So yeah, check that out. And that's about it for the materials. So we are going to move on next to cutting the materials and measurements and all that fun stuff. Okay, so as you can see, the list of materials is it's pretty easy. It's all stuff that you're going to be able to find either at the dollar store, and you're going to be able to acquire yourself. The one thing that it might be a little bit harder to get is the nut grinder that I used to create all of the texturing. I mean, once you invest in that tool, you're going to get so much out of it for as far as texturing for terrain, for your models, and to be honest, one like sheet of that corkboard is going to go a long way. If you haven't checked out our nut grinder video, I got to do another shout out to Dan from Red Dragon, because he absolutely loves the nut grinder. I mean, it's just nut grinder, nut grinder, nut grinder. Every time I'm talking to him, he just can't stop talking about the nut grinder. He loves it so much. So much nut grinder. Anyways, moving on. Let's talk about the formation, how we've started to structure these together, and how we cut them apart and construct them.
All right. So when we're talking about measuring out the dimensions for this on our material, it's important to mention that you don't need to necessarily follow my guide for the measurements on this. you can do what you want. You can make these as tall or as short as you'd like to. You can translate these into maybe something that's more like a Jersey barrier for a city, or you could also turn these into like something larger and more intact, maybe less ruined, to create some really cool, we call them the Nova L's now, that you see a lot of tournaments that are creating like line of sight blocking terrain, which is really important at the center of the table just to kind of balance out the terrain. Starting with our core, I've gone ahead and drawn 2 1-inch thick lines here on the PVC. What's going to happen here is we're going to actually just score this and break it off. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to line these 2 together into an L, probably glue them together. It's probably a good idea to just glue the 2 edges together in an L. And I'm going to cut down and just shave down the edges and make these a little bit more smooth. Careful cutting this stuff. Always cut away from yourself just because it is, and cut on a solid surface. And I almost prefer to cut downwards on it. And just what we're going to do is we're just going to smooth out the edges, just to make it look a little bit more, just give a better transition to the table. So yeah, when we're done that, we'll be back with the outcome of this. Okay, so we're going to now show you guys what we have as a result of this. So here you have what we've created as a sort of base, which is going to match our measurements for our foam core, which I've already drawn out. And what's going to happen is we're just going to create an L like this with the foam core, and it's going to sit on here nice and flush. And when we are finished that, we're going to or cutting out the foam core, we're going to mount it using some hot glue. So next we're going on to cutting the foam core. So here we are with our measurements, kind of gone ahead and made the entire measurements for basically drew out everything for the project. So here we have, this is 3 3/4 inch tall, and like I said, that's kind of a perfect height to hide maybe a traditional dreadnought, maybe not the new Primaris dreadnoughts, but this is a good height for that size of model, monster kind of models, maybe Tau battle suits, normal Tau battle suits, not Riptides. But yeah, and then what I've done is I've measured it out at 3 3/4 inches, and then I have just drawn out a little bit of a crack line along here, and that's going to be the destroyed section of the wall. And when you put 2 of them together, you end up with a nice little blown out hole in the middle of the wall section. So it's kind of cool how that all lines up when you get a couple pieces of this made. But another thing is that by doing the cuts like this, I mean, this piece is going to end up being reversed, and when the 2 of them meet together in an L, yeah, I mean, you're going to have your blown out wall sections on both sides of the L. And then here I've drawn out what these are. This is a 1/4 inch. Sorry, it's not a 1/4 inch. It's a 1/2 inch. My math is great today. So this is a 1/2 inch wide piece, and I made it exactly as tall as this section. And then what I did was I just took off a little piece at the top there, and I drew these little lines. And what these are going to do is they're going to be, I'm actually going to cut these once I get this piece cut out at a slight angle. And that's just going to be the transition to kind of fade the, I'm going to call them buttresses, but they're just kind of braces or reinforced, make the wall look a little bit more reinforced. But what it's going to do is it's going to blend in up here with the rest of the wall, and yeah, that's why you're going to want to cut these on a slight angle. So all right, so we're going to go ahead and chop out all these pieces and show you what we've got when we're done this. So now we have our cut out wall sections. So here we have our 2 wall sections, and I trimmed them down a little bit, obviously to fit the L that I measured out and mismeasured. I mean, remember guys, measure twice, cut once, or measure like 18 times and then cut 7 times like I like to. But anyways, here's the corner. So that's what it's going to end up looking like. And when it's kind of mounted, and then when we take our PVC and we mount it, it's going to end up looking like that. So it fits pretty perfectly. I do leave a little bit of room at the end there for a little rubble pile, just to kind of add to the effect of the blown out wall section. And what I've done here is I've actually drawn out the 1/2 inch markers for the buttresses or the braces. And what that's going to do is, yeah, it just gives me a marker for where I'm going to be gluing them on. So this is what the little buttresses end up looking like. And when those are on, looks pretty good. So it's kind of blended in well. I mean, if you have to go back and chop it a little bit just to make it flush at the top, I recommend doing that, just because I mean, you don't want this part to be sticking out like that. So the other thing is when we glue all of these on, we're going to glue them on with some hot glue. You can also use white glue or, like I said, the Mod Podge, and just kind of let that dry. And yeah, so we're going to mount this. We're going to put these on. We're going to mount this to the PVC base, and then we'll be back with the next step. And we're back after cutting it all up and gluing it all together. This is what it's going to end up looking like. I do recommend doing these in batches. You definitely don't want to do just one wall section. It's really easy to do a bunch of these at a time. So maybe ending up with like, say, you know, 6 or 8 of these can end up being really cool. And when 4 of them are put together in kind of a square with the blown out wall sections, it looks really cool, and it's good for surrounding like maybe like a void generator for a city or something like that. Maybe some of the Sector Mechanicus terrain in the middle of it ends up looking really, really sharp. And yeah, so just this is kind of what it ends up looking like. And we're going to be moving on from here to the texturing. So when before we move on to that, I do want to kind of touch on just adding a little bit of detail to this. So when I was breaking off the edges here, I didn't just like leave the cut from the knife originally. I ended up basically ripping. You can see there's still some paper on there, but just to kind of give it that like damaged look. So yeah, it's just kind of let your imagination go wild. Give it a little bit of battle damage. Don't go too crazy with it, because you might end up ruining the kind of the structural integrity of the whole piece if you go too crazy. But I mean, you can do blown out wall sections, like kind of holes with some scorch marks around it when you're done the painting and everything, just to give it that look. But I'm going to show you really quickly how I just get the kind of bolter shell effect. Give you an example of a finished product here. So here you can see the bolter rounds, or just ammunition that has hit the yeah, some bullets that just hit the concrete and took chunks out of it or passed through. I mean, it's just good for adding some battle damage. So we're going to go back to our trusty pen that we use to measure everything. And pen just happens to be perfect size for doing this kind of thing. And what we're going to do is we're just going to punch holes, and I'm just going to wiggle it around a little bit to just kind of make the distressing from the sort of entry point. And I mean, it wouldn't be a perfect circle, right? So, and then I'm just going to kind of do that and just add some damage there, and then maybe put one up here because a little stray round. This, maybe we're playing Star Wars. This is a stormtrooper. I mean, that's the grouping of a stormtrooper, right? And yeah, that's it. So now we have the damage there. And yeah, you can just kind of keep going with that. I mean, you could blow this like a hole right through there if you really wanted to, and just kind of make it look like there's a big hole blown out of it. I mean, it's not going to be providing much line of sight blocking terrain if you end up doing that, but somebody will measure from a banner or something to it and then ruin your day. But yeah, just adding some distressing, some damage to it can really end up resulting in just a cool kind of look to it. Another thing you can do is take out some chunks from the top of it. I mean, we are going to go a step further with this and add some details later, but yeah, just adding some damage to the top of the wall can also just give it a little bit more character too. And yeah, so now that that's done, we're ready to move on to the all-important step of texturing the wall. Now, no concrete is just a smooth. I mean, it shouldn't look just completely smooth like that. You want to give it some texture. Again, everything's exaggerated with terrain building. The real texture of this would almost be impossible to see at this scale, but we want to add some grit to this just to give it. From afar, you can see the texture, and yeah, it looks great when it's painted. So moving on to that, we're going to need our brush. We're going to need our Mod Podge we're using in this case, but again, you can use just like a white glue, PVA glue, and water mixture. I'd probably say about 75% water, or sorry, 75% glue to 25% water in this situation, just because you want this stuff to stick on really well. And then you can dilute it a little bit more when you go to do a second layer over top of it to seal it. So we're going to texture the walls first. We're going to just hit the walls with the glue or your adhesive, and not worry about doing the base yet. Some glue might drip down. You might get some glue around the bases. That's okay. Don't worry. The project isn't ruined. You're going to be able to go back and you're going to add a little bit coarser grit to the base, just to give it. Just to give a little bit more rubble and more variation of rubble. But you want to try to stick to the same grit for the walls. So we're going to use that really fine stuff that we showed at the beginning. So, all right, so we'll get on to that and we'll be back in a sec. And this is our sort of final product after we've done the texturing on it. So once we let this dry the first time, again, as I mentioned, we went over the wall sections first with a fine grit. This is just, this is the cork sand, so to speak, that I create using the nut grinder, my favorite tool. If I haven't mentioned that before, I need to mention it again. And again, when I kind of sorted it or sifted the fine stuff out, you end up with a lot of this stuff, which is like the little bit more coarse texture. It's really good for city rubble. And then you end up with some large chunks also. So here you have some big chunks of cork, which you could use the leftover pieces from the foam core, and you could get creative with that and kind of like grind it up and make some chunks and put them as the broken down sort of wall sections at the end. But yeah, so that's kind of what it looks like once it's been fully textured. Now, what you do want to do is go over this with with either a mix of PVA glue and water. Like I said, you're probably going to want to water it down a little bit more. You might want to move to like a 75-25 water to PVA glue, or maybe a 50-50 probably be safe. But I like to be really do a couple coats and go with a little bit more water base. And then it's important that you let this dry fully before you go over to do the sealing afterwards, and really like get it to be really stuck to it. So yeah, more dry time is going to obviously reduce the amount of stuff that's going to kind of pull away when you go over and you do the sealing. But again, it's okay to have little spots and stuff. Don't worry about being completely perfect. In the end, the end product, I mean, you're going to end up with spaces that are just kind of have kind of open, no texture, so to speak, and you can just see see it a little bit there, but it's not. I mean, I still think it looks good personally. So, and yeah, and that's what you end up with. This is this could be the final product. And again, this can be translated to make, you can make large wall sections. You can make these a lot taller, do Nova Ls out of it, and kind of give them a little bit more flavor than just kind of a chunk of styrofoam in the middle of the table like we're starting to see. I get it, because they have to make so many for big tournaments, but I mean, just kind of shows how a little bit of effort and creativity can go a long way. Now, taking this and painting it, remember that it is foam core, so if you're going to spray it with a spray paint, remember that the acetone will eat away at the styrofoam, so you're going to really want to make sure that you're using the right product to base coat this stuff. Even with the sealer on it, it will eat away a little bit at it. I find that if you put the Mod Podge on, that is another kind of bonus to that stuff. I swear they're not sponsoring me, or anything like that, but that stuff is great in the sense that I find that if I do seal it with the Mod Podge and just slightly water that down, that you don't need to do a 50-50. You could do like a 75-25 Mod Podge to water. But yeah, what it ends up doing is it actually ends up giving it a little bit of protection from the spray paint. So I can go over, and if it does eat away a little bit at the edges, the exposed foam, it's not the worst. It's not the worst thing in the world. What ends up happening is it just gives it a little extra texture. So it actually ends up looking pretty cool. And that's what I did with these examples that we have here. So I'm going to put this down, pick this guy up, and start going over some of the details. So when I went through painting the painting process for this, really simple. I actually did like a zenithal prime. So I started off with a black, and then I moved to a like a mid gray, and did just from the top and just kind of let the shadows kind of naturally fall as you do with a zenithal prime. If you haven't seen that before, you might want to take a look at that, because it's a really cool way of painting, especially when you're doing like cityscapes, because if you use grays, blacks, grays, and whites, you can really give some really cool color variation and get a really easy effect really quickly. And that's pretty much what I did. I moved up from a darker gray to almost a white. Actually, it was a white, and I just hit the tops of it, and then I went back and added some of the other details that you see here. So using an airbrush, we just hit the edges of any of the damage with a little bit of black, just to give it a little bit of that scorched kind of feel. And then yeah, let's move on to I do want to quickly touch on this razor wire. So again, not sponsored, but I'm willing. Battlefield razor wire from Army Painter. So this stuff is awesome. It's pretty affordable, and it might not look like you get a lot with it. And at first glance, when I looked at it, I thought, okay, I'm not going to get that much in here, and it's probably not going to go that far. So I got it for a couple little basing projects, and I thought that yeah, again, it wouldn't go that far. I'd be able to do maybe like a unit with it or something, but it goes way further than I expected. First of all, it does not come in this shambled mess that you see before you. It actually comes pretty tightly wound. I've opened it up here just ahead of time to show you guys kind of what you can do with it. I'm going to take the end of my knife. Again, be careful with the blade, guys. But what you can do is you can actually wrap this stuff around like so. And what it ends up doing is it creates the perfect kind of spiral effect for razor wire. I don't even know if you guys can see that because it's like white on white. There we go. Okay, so yeah, it just ends up creating this kind of cool spiral effect. And if you just keep going with that, and then even cut out smaller sections, what I did was I cut out some small little sections and folded them in half to make little clips. And then, let's see if you guys can see this, but the clips actually pushed into the foam, and they helped hold the razor wire in place. I used just a little dab of hot glue on the end of the clip and pushed it into the foam and helped keep the razor wire in place. I mean, it's still loose in the middle a little bit, but once you get a couple coats of paint on there, it ends up looking really cool. Yeah, and then I just took, I think it was burnt umber, which I used a lot in our city fight table, just to create some burn effects and also some weathering. So here just you have the rust streaks coming down the wall. And yeah, I used it on the fencing, and then I used some oranges and some reds to create that kind of rust effect on the razor wire. But wicked product, great job, Army Painter. I really do love this stuff, and I'm using it for basing my entire Scions faction that I'm working on right now, who just got a bump, so I'm really excited about that. But yeah, so I mean, that's it. That's the end product, and quick and easy, really low cost. I mean, the most expensive thing I think out of this whole project, other than the initial costs for the tools necessary to do it, but I think this was probably the most expensive thing in the whole project, and it adds a really cool effect. Or maybe it was the paying for the color prints of the million little propaganda posters I made. I don't know. Anyways, it was low cost. It's you can make a ton of these with cheap materials, and ends up being a really cool terrain piece. So,
okay, so as you can see, it's not a overly difficult process to form them, and the stuff is really easy to work with, and it's kind of forgiving because, I mean, at the end of the day, once you do all the texturing and everything on it, these are supposed to be sort of ruined, semi-ruined pieces, so you do want them to look a little rough. The edging and everything doesn't have to be 100% perfect. These things have taken some wear and tear over time, either countless battles in the city or maybe some carpet bombing. That's kind of what I was going for with the whole theme of the table, which you'll see soon. So we're just going to talk a little bit about just the little finishing details I added to the models. The propaganda posters, I mean, there's 1,000,001 propaganda posters if you search Warhammer 40K propaganda posters in Google. There's tons of options out there. There's lots of fan-made stuff out there. People have posted it up on sites like Daka and just kind of put it out there for everybody to use. So take a look. Obviously, don't grab anything without checking to make sure that you can use it. And yeah, we're not going to highlight too much on that, but it's just a cool little detail. What I actually did with the pieces is I actually used a lighter and I scorched the edges of all of the little posters just to give them that shape, that weathered shape. And also, if this has been kind of firebombed or carpet bombed the city, a lot of the buildings and everything are going to be burned out. A lot of the edging on the when we were doing the painting is also kind of burned. So I kind of wanted it to look like there had been some fire that had been sort of just kissing these posters and making them a little bit more weathered. And then from there we went on to paint them a little bit. So I just used some Agrax Earthshade, threw a little bit of ink on there, or sorry, washes on there, just to get, again, to weather it a little heavier. Using some what I ended up doing to just get them to stick to their surfaces, I ended up using Mod Podge again. Or you just use PVA glue, white PVA glue and water, but I just love Mod Podge because it dries so clearly when it's all done. White glue will too, but I find that there's a little bit of a texture to it. So I wanted to get these things to stick as well as possible, and also when they dry, they ended up turning out pretty good. So it was just cutting up all the different ones, picking places you want to put them. I mean, you could carpet the side of one of these walls with them and make it look really cool, like just like there was like hundreds of notes stuck to the wall or something like that if you wanted to go that direction. But the weathering, again, was just really Agrax Earthshade and adding that to it. And then there's a couple of the wall sections where I added a little bit of blood splatter. There was one section that had a couple of bullet holes kind of drilled in it, and it looks like somebody had maybe been standing there and gotten shot, and there was a little bit of splatter. Just decided to go really grimdark and give it a little bit of that war-torn vibe. Like, I mean, these things have seen some action, obviously with all the damage. And then I also used the brush, and I just used the edge of a knife and sprayed some blood splatter on one of the posters and on one of the walls with the poster, just to give it that little effect. I used Blood for the Blood God, which is an amazing technical paint from Games Workshop. Just makes some really cool, especially if you do that whole splattering thing with a knife and just running the bristles of your brush, load it up, and then run the bristles of your brush over top of a knife or a flat edge, and then just kind of create some splatter effects. You can do that with your models too. So I mean, take that and use it if you will. And that was it. So that's how we created these. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this. I hope you guys enjoy making your own versions of these. Please, I would be really interested in actually seeing your guys' finished versions of these. If you do end up taking this video and making your own, post them up in our Facebook. We're Anvil of War Gaming on Facebook. Check us out. Our link's below in the video description. And post it up. We'd love to see it. I'd love to see what you guys have created. So thanks for watching, and till next time.
Sponsored by
Thanks for watching Anvil of War Gaming. If you liked our videos and you want to check out more of our content, click on the links on the screen, or click on our icon to subscribe to the channel.
Hi, I'm Adam, and we're going to talk about concrete
That's my